Happening, folks. It's happening. Here it goes. The long-awaited LCTRfan v Destiny debate. Mic check.
Mic check. Hey, what's up?
What's happening?
Nothing much. How you doing?
Pretty good.
Well, that's good.
So I have to say that I've been having people begging me and pleading that I debate you for a very long time.
Yeah, I can imagine people run around Twitch and do it. What do you wait? So real quick, what exactly do you do?
I'm a commercial litigation attorney, and tort litigation, real estate litigation, kind of general civil litigation stuff. And then I've been streaming on Twitch since like 2015. I've been streaming a long time, but it's just been hard because I work full time, so I can only basically stream for a couple hours at night.
Gotcha.
But I remember back in like 2015, like most Twitch channels like completely banned politics, and so except for like yours. And then I was like one of the first ones to come out and like kind of focus on it too. So it's crazy to see how much it's changed in the last 5 years to where it's such a big deal now.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what topic? What's the topic for today?
That's what everybody's asking. I mean, I don't know if we could just continue the coronavirus Trump topic and see where that goes, or start somewhere else. Doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, I mean, I have a hard time seeing how anybody could actually say that Trump has had an effective response to this. It seems like he spent a great deal of time both not addressing warnings that had been brought up prior to anything, and then had spent a great deal of time not really taking it seriously once even China knew that the virus was pretty widespread.
Well, how can you say that when Trump very early on closed all travel to China, and at that time when he did that in late January, that was a very bold move to cut off travel from China, and Democrats, including Biden, said, "Oh, this is so xenophobic, this is racist," and so he was actually taking early and strong action and being criticized from the Democrats for that. I mean, did you agree with Biden's criticisms of that?
I don't remember I don't remember Biden's criticisms, but I don't remember Trump banning travel until it had been like weeks after the Wuhan had been reporting issues.
Well, okay. If you were calling for a ban on travel from China before Trump actually did it, that would hold water. But most Democrats at the time, leftists, whatever you want to call them, were saying this is too early, this is too drastic. Now,
Wait, you said Biden was one of those people?
yes.
Okay. Biden criticized Trump travel ban. I'm curious.
Biden banning China travel, hysteric xenophobia. There we go. Here we go. Flashback. Biden called Trump's Chinese coronavirus travel ban xenophobia. I don't know if you found a source yet, but NPR reported at the time. Democratic presidential frontrunner Joe Biden on Thursday took direct aim at the Trump administration's response to the coronavirus, saying the administration's failure is colossal. Blah, blah, blah. Former
Well,
vice
so on the blah blah blah, so like I'm trying to find like all of the statements. So I'm seeing two here. One is a wall will not stop the coronavirus. Banning all travel from Europe or any other part of the world will not stop it. The disease could impact every nation and any person on the planet, and we need a plan to combat it. So here it makes it sound like Biden is saying we're not doing enough. And then another quote below says, because if you look at the numbers, it's very clear that 70% of new infections in the world are coming from that region, from Europe. Of the 35 or more states that have infections, 30 of them now, most recently, have gotten them from travel-related cases from that region, which makes it sound like oh wait, hold on. This is what Fauci said.
Well, that sounds like that was probably later, because then Trump was also very early on to ban travel from Europe as well. So I don't know. I mean, you're like, I don't know. I can't imagine how anybody could say Trump did a good job, and it's like, Dude, Trump has done everything right. Like, can you point to
Well, like
any
I so
one thing Trump has done
Well, yeah.
wrong?
So the biggest problematic things I need to look up the timeline more specifically on his travel because I've been reading that like his travel restrictions came pretty late. I guess the biggest problem is the rhetoric aimed around the bans itself has always sound like he's incredibly downplaying the problems, like saying that like it's just a few people that are affected, will be over it in no time, like this isn't a real problem at all, like.
Okay, and my response to that is that the left has been way overhyping the coronavirus, way overreacting, literally going into panic mode and literally promoting panic because as for a political purpose. And Democrats from the beginning have been trying to politicize this, and one of the way that they've been politicizing it is by making it out to be this huge deal because they know that that will result in basically an economic shutdown. And frankly, it's way overhyped. I mean,
Well, okay, so
over
wait, so we can.
over 99% of people that get this thing are going to survive. 80% of cases are just mild. It goes
Well, wait,
on
okay,
a
hold
bell
on, wait,
curve.
wait,
Every
wait. There's a
virus
lot of.
goes on a bell curve. Like, this is
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
go
So wait,
away.
yeah. So there's a lot of weird stuff going on here. So firstly, the idea that somebody would try to politicize something, literally everything is politicized. Like if you're a political figure, almost every action you do is going to be political in nature, right? Like that's just a de facto thing. School shootings are politicized, terror attacks are politicized. Like literally everything is politicized because you need policy and political power to enact some type of
But
change.
that doesn't make it good or okay.
Well, it's a fact of the matter. It's literally unavoidable, inescapable. Every single
It
thing you do
is.
as a
Yeah,
politician is
but
going to
that
be
doesn't mean that
politicized
it's
to some extent.
okay. So just because
Sure.
something is just because that's the way it is doesn't mean that that's okay.
Well, I mean, I would argue it's necessary, but so like our main criticism, the second thing you said is more important. Is the response like overhyped or something, or are we taking an incorrect response rather than a political one? Because a political one, there's every response is going to be political in nature. Of course, any bill we talk about is going to be political in nature. So then the question is whether or not the response is overhyped. So a lot of the statements that you've made in terms of like the mortality rate and everything not being too high, we're not. I mean, like the primary concern of the virus is never like that people are going to get infected and 50% of them are going to die. The primary concern has always been the overwhelming of hospitals and then the inability of hospitals to treat the more serious cases and then to treat other people that might need similar equipment like ventilators or something as well. So it's not that we're like worried that like the coronavirus is going to kill 50% of the population, just that it's going to overwhelm our current medical system.
Right. Well, thank God that we have as good of a medical system as we do, and we're not like Italy or the UK with the socialist healthcare system where they're literally getting overrun because their government runs socialized healthcare systems. And so the United States is actually the most well prepared for a pandemic of any country.
So every single hospital administrator would disagree with you, though. We've had massive shortages of PPE in almost every part of the country.
No, that's false. They're predicting massive. I just watched Governor Cuomo's press conference the other day. He literally said, right now we have everything we need. We're getting in hundreds of thousands of PPE. There's a prediction. See, this is what I'm saying. Like you guys are making these predictions and then using that to paint this doomsday scenario as if we're all dying and the hospitals are overrun as a way to try to hurt Trump. Now, look, if you've got an actual legitimate criticism and it happens to be political, that's fine. But the problem is that most of these criticisms are not only political, but they're not based in reality either. The hospitals are not overrun. That's a prediction about what might happen.
Okay, I guess I can start going around and digging for specific threads, but here's like Grady Hospital at or near capacity amid coronavirus pandemic as mayor says breaking point is imminent. Like, you don't think that there are hospitals around the country that are getting worried about like being overwhelmed or don't have the equipment necessary?
Yes, they are getting worried. The thing you just said, it's imminent, quote unquote imminent. Look, it might happen, but it's not happening right now. It's not like we're Italy where we've got a socialist healthcare system and people aren't getting the care they need. That's just not happening in the United States right now. I'm not saying it won't happen, but my point is it's not happening. You guys are all acting like it's already happening, and even the quote you just said, it's imminent, which means it's not happening right now.
Okay, but like if we look at the number of confirmed cases, we see where it's going. Like, do we just, so like in 3 days when we have over like 200,000 confirmed cases, we're like, okay, well now it's a problem. Now we can do it. Like the whole point is to prepare for it. No,
I agree. And my point is that Trump has been doing a lot of things to prepare for this. Lots of other governors and local
But
officials
he
are doing a
hasn't
lot of
been,
things
though.
to
That's the
prepare
whole
for it.
point. Every state is in massive confusion over what exactly we're supposed to be doing. Different federal agencies are combating each other over who has priority over what. All the schools in all the states are super confused. Different states are recommending different types of restrictions for public gatherings. Like there's a whole
Okay,
ton of confusion at the federal and state level for how to coordinate against this.
first of all, Dr. Fauci just, or maybe it was Dr. Birx, just today said, yes, we want to have different policies in different states. If you're having an outbreak in one state or one locality, that you should have a different response to that. So in some states where you don't have very many cases, you can actually do containment. Whereas in other states where it's already growing, you can do mitigation. And like if they're confused, then that's their own problem. Like we live in a federal system where the states are sovereign. The states are supposed to be governing themselves. We don't want just top down controls from the federal
If there
government.
was ever a time, if there was ever a time for us to cite the Commerce Clause as being relevant for like the federal government stepping in, or for times of national security, like I'm pretty sure a pandemic would be it, right? Like I
No,
know that
that's
there are going to be
fine.
different. I know that there are going to be different cases for like how different states should treat themselves. So, for instance, if there are like two cases in Wyoming, they should probably take different precautions than like New York or California, of course.
Right.
But the idea that states are just doing different things because they know they need to do different things and not out of confusion, I don't think that's true at all. Like a lot of people are critical of Florida's response right now, how people are still gathering everywhere, and essentially nothing is being done in that state. And I know that there's still a lot of confusion on schools over what exactly they should be doing because they're looking for federal or even state guidelines as well, and nobody really knows like what the response is supposed to be.
Okay, well, and if that's the case, that's a state issue. The if you look at the federal government's guidelines, they've issued guidelines. We've been promoting them all along. It's stay at home if you're sick, stay at home, work from home if you can, et cetera, et cetera. Schooling is a specific local issue. I mean that's if people are confused about what's going on with the schools, that's literally like the local school board and then maybe the state. That's got nothing to do with the federal government.
Well, but it does because the federal government, the CDC, and other federal agencies, the National Security Council, are coordinating with states in order for them to know what to do, right? I wouldn't expect or even want like an individual state to make a decision on how it best deal with a pandemic that it doesn't really have the resources to analyze, study, or make guidelines about, right? Like that's what the CDC is for.
Well, but the CDC gives out information, and then you leave it up to the governors and local officials to make the decision. Because, as you just agreed with me, if you've got a massive outbreak in New York City and in Wyoming, you don't have any cases, or you've got two cases and they're isolated, you don't need to shut down the entire economy. Because you've got New York City having an outbreak. You also don't need to have the entire economy shut down when you can literally just isolate at-risk people. And so my main problem with all this is that it seems like people are not analyzing the costs and benefits of any of these orders, and they're literally just begging for the government to violate their rights. Personally, I think it's a huge violation of civil liberties for any government at any level to order people to stay in their homes, to prohibit assemblies. I mean, the right to peaceably assemble is right in the First Amendment. We have a fundamental First Amendment right to peaceably assemble, and people are just totally fine with the government just banning assemblies of
Well,
people.
so like
And
these
it's
are
like,
these are two fundamentally different conversations. So we want to talk about like whether or not the government ought to be allowed to violate a First Amendment right to gather. That's going to be a totally different conversation than whether or not banning our right to gather is going to be an effective means of combating a pandemic,
no,
right?
I agree. Yeah. But I
Sure.
mean, my main point is that Trump has been doing a good job and that states can
Well, but
do it.
like, didn't
I
he?
don't
He
think
literally
there's,
just banned travel like 2 weeks ago. Fauci himself says that he wished that NSC office that was in charge of pandemic response was still open, and that's Fauci himself said that. Cuomo, who you said was doing just fine, is literally begging for ventilators from the federal government. They've only gotten 400 of them. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't really seem like things are going as smoothly as you seem to believe they are. Although I guess your main argument is that it's not bad right now, and maybe it'll all just stop here, and then like tomorrow everybody will go back to work, and it was just a
no,
small flu, and we're done with it. Or
no. You're mischaracterizing my arguments in two ways. One is that I'm not saying this is all fine and everything's going perfectly. I'm saying that Yeah, there are problems, and a lot of these problems coming from too much bureaucracy at the federal level, too many regulations, too much red tape. Most of what Trump has had to do is cut through all of these Obama era regulations and Obama era red tape so that the government can actually move fast. I mean, we were literally waiting on the FDA to approve tests early on, and then the CDC bureaucracy screwed up the tests at the beginning. None of that is Trump's fault. So there are bad things happening. None of it's Trump's fault. The stuff that's Trump has actually done, including all of the
I don't.
public messaging, has been spot
So,
on.
but this is Trump's fault then. If these were problems that existed with the CDC, Trump should have fixed them before like we actually ran into a problem. Like that would be his responsibility. And the idea that he just did a travel ban from China and then on 2 months sat on it and did nothing, I don't think it's an adequate response to this problem that we have now. And then to blame Obama after we've had months to do something about it, or to blame about the bureaucratic red tape, he's constantly trying to cut the CDC budget. I don't know. That just seems like a weird position to take.
Well, first of all, we've had more regulatory cuts under Trump than we've ever had, and
It's a
he's
vague
basically
statement that means nothing.
He's
Okay.
been cutting them as fast as he can, and yeah,
That's it. These are
could he
vague.
have-
Well, hold on.
could
When we talk about we're not just broadly talking about government regulations that need to be cut. I'm curious, like, and I don't want to push on this. I don't need like the specific answer, but like, I'm highly suspect that there were some very specific provisions that Obama had in place, especially after the Ebola scare, that hampered the CDC's ability to do anything, and Trump just couldn't get through them in 2 months. It more felt like they just didn't have the political will to do it.
Well, I don't know. Maybe that's the case, but um,
Especially when we were already running big tests in the government in 2019 that showed us how ill-prepared we were. Like everything that came out of that contagion contamination test or whatever are all problems that we're running into now. Lack of coordination between federal agencies, confusion among the states, inability to have protective equipment doled out, unwillingness or unable to know which jobs could be worked from home or not. Like all of those problems that we ran into in that simulation are exactly playing out in real time now.
okay. Well, Destiny, if your main point is that the government and the bureaucracy screws things up, I'm going to agree with it. This is why, like, yes, the government is going to be bad at things. The government's bad at everything. That's why you don't want the government controlling everything. Frankly, there was just a report today from Los Angeles Times and Bloomberg News showing that the federal stockpile of N95 masks was depleted under Obama and never restocked. Despite recommendations that they restock the masks. And so I don't want to get into this like, oh, is it Obama's fault? Was it Trump's fault? Like, I'll give it to you. Yes, the government could have done a better job on all of these various things, but it's not Trump's fault. And if
Wait, you said
anything,
real
it
quick, you said
supports-
that there was a federal stockpile. The federal stockpile of N95 masks was depleted and not.
under Obama and then not restarted. Yes. Bloomberg News and LA Times. And then more than that, you're talking about a 2019 study about how unprepared we are and how we had to do this. In fact, there was a Johns Hopkins study in 2019 showing that the U.S. is the most prepared country for pandemics. But look, like, again, I'll give it to you that the government is not going to be perfect at responding to a pandemic. Governments are not good at anything they do. That actually supports the conservative viewpoint on life and politics and government. So if your main point is like, yeah, the government screwed up, the bureaucracy screwed up, great. I'll agree with you on that. If you want to try to point fingers at Trump for political reasons, you're going to lose me on there.
Well, I guess like the weird thing is that like, so there's three big problems right now. So if we want to say that the government screws things up, that's fine. But ultimately that's Trump's responsibility. He's the head of state, right?
Okay. Yeah, okay. So if you want to blame it on Trump in just sort of a theoretical, the buck stops here sense, okay. But in reality,
well, but isn't that his whole selling point as a businessman? I don't know like what your experience is in terms of practicing law, but like if you run a small business, like the buck stops with you. You can't just blame your subordinates for it or just blame other people. That's like when you brag about being able to like, well, I'm a businessman, so I'm going to be accountable. Like, I mean, what is management or business besides the ultimate of accountability, right? When I have to argue with lefties about why CEOs get paid so much, that's my go-to argument. Well, the reason why a CEO is compensated is because the CEO is in charge of the entire fucking company. If shit gets fucked, the CEO can't blame a manager. That would look ridiculous. The shareholders would throw you out in an instant. So the idea that Trump could come into government, know that the N95 masks are depleted, assuming that's true, but knowing that those N95 masks are depleted, have a simulation ran in the government and then see that, oh, wow, well, we really do need those N95 masks, and then try to cut the CDC budget anyway by like $700 $700 million and not do anything about it seems like a pretty massive failure on his part. And then one other thing, real quick, you said that the U.S. is the most prepared country for pandemics. If that's true, then that's even worse because South Korea then would have been less prepared than us, and they got those test kits out and they got that quarantine out, and they massively got on top of everything as soon as they saw what was going on in China. They didn't just do a one random travel ban and then say that it was a hoax for the next 2 months until the rest of the world was like breathing down our neck, like falling apart, waiting to see if the U.S. would say or do anything. Like, I don't know. That makes us look even worse if that's true, because South Korea, who was unprepared, massively responded to this in a better way than we did.
Well, I mean, South Korea has the kind of the technology to do more containment in terms of tracking, tracking actual people that have had viruses. And what's interesting, I think, about the South Korea,
we're the United States of America.
Yeah,
no
but the
way
federal government is not tracking people's cell phones like they are in South Korea. At least that's what I've read. But the point,
we literally have the Patriot Act. You don't think that we can track people's cell phones in the United States?
Well, not openly and publicly. Not
sure, but I'm sure that like if the CDC had some initiative or whatever, I'm sure that there's something that we could do insofar as tracking. The idea that like it's just the federal government's fault that we didn't track people, you don't think that had anything to do with the messaging coming top down from Trump, who was saying that this was all just being politicized as a hoax initially?
Well, it is being politicized, and it's one hoax after another against Trump. That's why, dude, this is why nobody takes the left seriously when you want to try to blame this stuff on Trump. Like the United States response from the average American looking at this, it's like, okay, wow, we've been taking a lot of pretty severe actions. The federal government and the CDC have put out some strong recommendations. Yeah, Trump shut down travel very early on. Yeah, we're cranking up production of masks. The whole testing thing is kind of interesting because from what Dr. Burke said, the South Korea tests actually had very high false positives and false negatives. And so one of the reasons we didn't have mass testing like South Korea did at the beginning is because we wanted to make our own test that wasn't going to create tons of false positives and false negatives. I mean, we just have a much higher standard. Now, in retrospect, if we would have just been better off using
hold on.
A different test. But, okay, go ahead.
What you just said, okay. Feels like a conservative thing. When you just said we have much better standards, those are called bureaucratic red tape.
I agree.
Those standard, yeah, okay. So we can agree then, at least, if you're willing to admit that not all bureaucratic red tape is bad. So, for instance, people say like, oh, well, it's taken us a long time to get out the test, blah, blah, blah. Well, we have much higher standards. We do have very high standards on our FDA for drugs and whatnot. We absolutely do.
Right.
That's a regulation. That's a bureaucratic red tape that comes to the federal government.
I agree.
So this idea that I have a feeling if I say one hoax after another, I don't want to run down the Russia hole. I don't know if there are other hoaxes you're thinking in terms of medical stuff.
There is. There was the Russia hoax, and then there was the Ukraine hoax, and it's like it's been one thing after another. So you just don't. The left doesn't have much credibility when you attack Trump politically. And this is what's honestly kind of sad about it is like Trump could do anything now, and like, what are you going to do? Impeach him again? I mean, it's just you guys have just blown all credibility on criticizing Trump, and the United States is doing pretty damn well on this pandemic response, and it's blown way out of proportion. I mean, look at the way South Korea was able to get this under control. Look at the way a lot of other countries have been able to get this under control. Look at the way pandemics naturally go in a bell curve where they go up and then they go down. And like,
but it's not a matter of it going up and down. It's a matter of how fast that it goes up. Earlier, when you said, like, why would you blame Trump on this? How many Republicans blamed Obama for the swine flu? Like, if you're going to blame Obama that our N95 masks were depleted, why wouldn't I blame Trump right now for not having enough N95 masks? Like, what responsibility does Trump actually have if it's his administration, his CDC?
No, you can blame him for not refilling the N95 mask stockpile, sure. But the easy response to that is, well, Obama was the one that depleted it. And the main point I was saying is, like, those are just going to fall flat because there's been so many false lies about Trump and so much stuff made up about so many lies about Trump. You even said the lie on that he called the virus a hoax, and everybody that's looked at that knows that he did not call the virus a hoax. He called Democrats trying to blame the virus, even going so far as to call it the Trump virus. That's so, like, the hoax.
We can say that, and if you give Trump's speech, because I watched the speech, if you give it a highly charitable reading, then maybe you can pull out of that the politicization. There's a word I'm looking for. If they're making it into a political issue, that if that whole thing was the hoax itself and not just the virus itself being a hoax, maybe we can read that. But with all of the other rhetoric that he's put out, how, well, it's just one person that'll be solved in a day, it's just 5 people, it's not a big deal, nobody cares about this. That idea that somebody would read into him saying that the whole virus itself is a hoax, I think that's a pretty fair reading. I don't think that's that crazy given everything else as Trump said about it.
Well, I don't think anything else Trump has said about it is bad, including at the beginning being optimistic that we only had 15 cases and that we could get it under control. This is,
but that's an incredibly stupid thing to say when you haven't tested for anything. Of course, you only have, like, if we stop testing right now, we're not going to have any more confirmed cases either. It doesn't really make sense to do that, right? Especially when he was so late on banning travel from Europe. He just did it 2 weeks ago.
No, you don't. Nobody knows at the time then when this is going on. Dr. Fauci has talked about this, how we're in the
South
fog
Korea
of
was
war.
already doing this. Of course, Fauci's saying this because if he says anything else, Trump's gonna fucking fire him, like he does with everybody that he butts heads with as an administration.
Fauci is a man of character. He would not say something just to keep his job, and that's
everybody around the world was taking pretty extreme measures to deal with this, while the U.S. was just asleep on it. Like you said it yourself, South Korea got ahead of this super hardcore. The idea that they're testing or whatever was producing a lot of false positives, I don't even know if that's true, but I know that they were able to get ahead of it, and they pretty much seems like they've gotten it under control. This idea that the U.S. was like just blindsided by it or in the fog of war, I don't know if that's not true. Like everybody around the world knew this was going on.
Well, yeah, but you don't know if it's in South Korea. That doesn't mean it's in the United States. But more importantly, like to take severe action, which I guess maybe you can tell me if you don't support this or not, but when you take severe action and you shut down an economy, that you have a massive health consequence to people's mental health. People lose jobs, people can't pay their rent, suicide spike, deaths of despair spike, all kinds of other deaths and health consequences spike. And so it's not just like, oh, hey, there's a virus that got started in China and now it's in South Korea. Well, we better shut down the entire economy, cancel everything, nobody go to work, nobody go to work. Let's crash the economy, totally crash the economy. No, that's not how you're supposed to respond to this, because those have very severe consequences. And that's why we still have to be very, very careful about crashing the economy for something where 99% of people survive. It doesn't make sense to just purposefully crash the economy.
Saying this, sure. So we keep saying, so I agree that like destroying the economy is bad. Everybody agrees with that, right? So it's a matter of weighing out like, well, what are the risks? What are the pros? What are the cons, right? The idea that everybody's going to start killing themselves because they're depressed or whatever is probably not going to happen. That doesn't seem historically to be the case. The problem, you keep saying that like 99% of people are going to survive. First of all, it's not 99%. That's a survival rate assuming everybody that needs to be hospitalized can be hospitalized. I think the COVID-19 hospitalization rates are anywhere from 10 to 15%. I've seen different numbers in different countries. So assuming that those 10% of people can't get into a hospital, they might die, right? Or maybe 90% of those people die. So now your mortality actually increases significantly. And if every single ventilator is being used or all of these beds are being occupied, all of the other diseases that are severe that might require treatments, other types of pneumonias or whatever, those people are going to die as well. So like you get other increases as well. And then if like medical personnel start dying, like the problems with this stuff is that all of it overwhelms your system, like and snowballs out of control. Like the airlines need a bailout because this is an unprecedented thing that's destroying their ability to do business. We can't bail out hospitals, right? You know, we could do cash infusions or loans or whatever to airlines. We can't just throw 100,000 medically trained staff into hospitals and expect that to keep it afloat, you know, during times of pandemic crisis.
No, I don't disagree with any of that. That's why, like, I'm okay with what the federal government's guidelines are for 15 days to slow the spread. Like, let's work from home for a couple weeks. Let's do this thing.
Sure, that's fine.
But what I'm opposed to are these Democrat governors issuing orders for people to stay in their home, literal lockdowns, very similar to martial law type stuff.
I don't think anything related to lockdowns or martial laws has gone into effect. No one in the U.S. is being killed for leaving their house. Cops aren't stopping you and asking you where you're going. I think that the encouragement to shut down jobs is probably reasonable. Keeping people inside is probably reasonable if it's just for like 2 weeks or maybe 4 weeks.
Like what? I've been reading nothing but like news stories about Democrat governors in California and other states literally saying we're shutting down all businesses except essential businesses, and it's a
Mhm.
stay-at-home order, and no assemblies of more than X number of people. Now, I don't know how that's being enforced, but the
Well, yeah,
mere
they're
I
recommendations that mean nothing. Just like Trump's travel recommendations initially, when he's like, "Oh, don't travel, guys." LOL. Like, I mean, they're not being enforced with like cop shooting. Or like, I have friends in New York. It's not happening. I live in LA. I can drive around. I'm not going to be shot and killed by LAPD or whatever. Um,
So you're telling me that there are no quarantines in the no state has actually quarantined an entire state and actually locked down people and said you stay in your houses and you can't leave out under penalty of being fined.
I haven't seen that. I've heard people talk about Ohio, that is a Republican governor, but I haven't heard of anybody actually being like fined or anything. Because like the thing is that like if you leave, you're allowed to leave for food or whatever. So like or hospital stuff or necessary travel. So like how would a cop even know? Like if a cop pulls me over to say, "Oh, I'm headed over to Kroger's," fuck off. Like
Okay, so you're saying that yes, they have issued orders to do this, but they're just not enforcing it.
yeah, they're not really enforcing it. It's basically just a very strong recommendation. I know that some of them have talked about wanting to enforce it. Like I think the California governor was mentioning that they might use police to enforce it, but I don't think that's happening anywhere yet.
Okay, according to the Wall Street Journal, Connecticut's governor ordered non-essential businesses to eliminate in-person workforces.
Mhm.
Delaware,
That's happening. The
Delaware,
closing of businesses is happening. Yes.
yeah, and I'm opposed to that too. The
Sure.
Delaware governor issued a shelter-in-place order. People still may leave their homes for various essential services. No assemblies of people. Some states have even tried to close down gun businesses, which is an out and out violation. I mean, this is just like incredibly draconian government actions that I think are a huge violation of civil liberties, regardless of the Constitution, just basic civil liberties.
Sure. Yeah, but I
Um,
mean, so it's a different argument on whether we want to say if they're effective versus if they violate civil liberties, right? Like those are two separate arguments.
Okay, well,
But I
nobody
mean,
disagrees with if it's effect. If you're gonna, of course, if you shut the economy down and everybody stays in their home, of course that's effective. I don't think there's a debate on that.
well, but we have to talk about the levels of effectiveness, right? Like if this is something that is like mildly effective but has severe economic damage, well, it might not be worth it depending on the cost, because people can die through economic harm as well. But like, yeah, I don't think the idea that like police are out in the streets enforcing this, that's just not true yet.
Well,
Um,
okay, so somebody just sent me a Daily Mail article. Two New Jersey homeowners face charges after hosting large gatherings, including a pop-up wedding at their home, as cops say people are ignoring the coronavirus lockdown. So
well,
the
yeah,
Daily
so
Mail
I know
is
they've banned
reporting that.
gatherings.
Yeah, and
Sure.
that's a violation of that's ridiculous. So I guess you haven't even really taken a position. Do you agree with these governors that are ordering lockdowns and quarantines and prohibiting gatherings of people? Or do you think
If it's
that
under
violates civil
CDC,
liberties too much?
I don't. In this case, I'm not really caring much about civil liberties. I guess we can make like national security arguments if we want to work through the civil liberties system around that. But I mean, it seems like every other country is in the process of banning large gatherings of people. The U.S. the CDC recommends banning gatherings of large amounts of people, and if that stops the spread of a virus that overwhelms our healthcare system and also causes widespread economic harm, then yeah, I'd be okay with that.
Okay, that's where I guess we disagree is because I'm absolutely not okay with this. What I think they ought to do is do recommendations instead of actually ordering. The problem is once you allow the government to issue lockdown orders like this, I mean that's an insanely big deal to actually issue orders where you can't leave your home and you can't have gatherings of people. There was an article published by a constitutional lawyer who literally went through like all of the different rights that are violated by this, including the First Amendment rights, Second Amendment rights, Fourth Amendment rights, Fifth Amendment rights, Sixth Amendment rights, Seventh Amendment rights, and like that we're just okay with this is just mind-boggling to me because this will be so easily abused. The next time there's even and especially given the circumstances where this is not Ebola, this is not like something where 60 to 70% of the people that get it die. With Ebola, if you get it, you have a 60 to 70% chance of dying. With this, it's literally like close to 1%. Or less. I've seen a lot of. We don't know for sure because there's so many undocumented
Well,
cases.
but the problem
Because
is that
so
like
many
this,
of these
yeah,
people.
but this is arguably worse than Ebola though. Like Ebola is incredibly lethal if you catch it, but it doesn't transmit to as many other people. Like your healthcare system isn't necessarily going to be overwhelmed like Ebola. It's kind of like the age-old argument of like what's a more lethal round? Like the AK rounds, a 7.62 by 3 9 rounds or whatever, or the like the 5.56 NATO rounds. Like, well, the 5.56 rounds suck more because you get injured and it overwhelms the resources of the enemy combatants rather than just outright kills you, right? It's like a similar type of argument. Yeah, Ebola is more lethal if you catch it, but like it's not projected that 150 million people in the U.S. would ever contract Ebola. I'm pretty sure like the way you get it is even through like
Yeah.
dead bodies or whatever. Like
Well,
people just
see,
don't transmit it that much because they get so sick so quickly.
well, the bringing up the 150 million point just makes my point about this being a total partisan, basically hype job and panic inducement, because that 150 million figure came from Rashida Tlaib, one of the most far left Democrat Congress people of all, and she said, "Oh, my personal doctor, the Congress's doctor said."
I understand. I don't like we should. I'm just using that example as a hypothetical, but I think in California, I want to say they projected 22 million infections. Is what they've said for California. Is what they're planning on. So I'm curious if if the number of confirmed cases were to continue to rise, how would you feel in like 2 weeks if we had over like 10 million confirmed cases in the United States? Like, would you feel like any of what's going on right now is being handled in an irresponsible way, or do you think that we're doing everything we can right now to deal with this?
I can't. I mean, I honestly can't think of what more we could actually do. What else could we even do?
Well, a more consistent top-down recommendation from the federal government of how every state should be acting in accordance with CDC
Okay.
guidelines. I don't. I would never say like nationalization of industry or whatever, but like commanding like private firms to start manufacturing these PPEs and everything, or ventilators and masks, which I think a lot of them have already voluntarily stepped to do. Which is
Yeah.
cool.
That's why, like, see, this is what's so weird is like the people on the left are begging for the government to order people around and to order you around when it's not even needed. I mean, you can just have a recommendation and most people follow it. And you're absolutely right. These businesses are voluntarily producing all of these masks and stuff. And the Trump administration and business leaders have said that consistently. It's like, yes, we've invoked the National Defense Production Act or whatever, but we're not going to use that because that's an incredibly heavy hand by the government, and if it's not needed, we don't want to go down that route. And like there's no thought about, okay, so if we set the precedent here that the government can just lock us down and quarantine us and prohibit assemblies and order businesses closed and do all of these draconian measures that really impede into our basic freedoms, then what happens next year when there's, maybe there's another swine flu that pops up, or it's a really bad regular flu season or anything else? It's like, if you don't recognize that the government will take the powers that they obtained during this crisis and then use and abuse them forever into the future and will never get these liberties back, then you haven't been paying attention to the history of how all of this works.
What if we go down the alternate road, though, where if the federal government didn't take as much of a precaution, we do have 150 million cases in the United States, and we do end up losing millions of people to this disease and then other diseases that aren't able to be treated in our medical system? Like, what if that's the alternative now? Why don't we even consider that instead of just thinking, well, what happens now? The disease is obviously bullshit, and now the powers might be abused over, the next year or whatever. Like, I don't know. That seems like,
well, that would be a tragedy, but
would that be preferable? I'm curious. If let's say we did no quarantining whatsoever and we had 3 million dead Americans to COVID-19, would that be preferable to the draconian measures that the government is taking now and the precedent set for civil liberties in the future?
Well, I agree with the state motto that says, give me liberty or give me death. I also agree with the founding fathers who say, if you're willing to give up your freedom for a little bit of security, you deserve neither and you'll get neither. And so I don't, that's a hypothetical that you're asking that is not even in the realm of possibility.
I'm just trying to figure out.
Like, here's the thing. Like, I am actually following.
I'm just trying to figure out how you weigh like what your like generator is for what you consider to be good or bad.
Well, let me tell you what it's not.
I'm curious if you're like so united to the idea of like civil liberties that like, let's say 3 million Americans die, that's okay as long as we get to maintain our civil liberties and the right to go outside and gather and everything.
Well, how many millions of Americans have fought and died in wars preserving liberty? So
Well, the difference,
what I
the difference for a war is that we have a volunteer military. I guess in the past, some like people were drafted, but even
right.
so, like that's affecting way different subsets of the population. Like if we were sending like 70-year-old people to go out and die in a war, I think that would be far different. Also, this is like highly preventable. Like these are measures where we don't have an enemy that like just propped up out of nowhere. And now we've got to fight them. Like we have technically the ability to control within our own borders right now how many people die. It's just a matter of trading off like economic or civil liberties temporarily in order to maintain our health. It's not the same as going to
Well,
war with a foreign enemy.
well, that's where I disagree. Is like it's not temporarily. That's it's never temporary. Once the government gets the power to order us around like this, it's not going to just go back and
But
we'll
the
go back.
government's
It's
already
just gonna.
had the power to do
I
this, though,
guarantee you.
right?
I guarantee you that this is going to be more and more common day in day in a day. Here's what the standard is not. And I've heard some Democrats and liberals say something as stupid as, "Oh, well, if it just saves one life, then it's worth it." Which is just the dumbest thing ever, because if that was the standard, then we would ban cars, because
Well, wait,
banning
hold on.
banning
No one
cars
is.
would
I'm
save
not. I'm not.
40,000
No one is.
lives.
Again,
I've
I don't
literally
know
heard
if
Democrats say if it saves one life, it's worth
sure
it.
they might. I don't. I doubt that it's possible. I seriously doubt that any leading Democrat said that. But I'm not making that argument right now. Obviously, that's a ridiculous argument. I just think it's strange that like, and you're kind of dancing around it, but like, you would be okay then with 1% of the American population dying if we didn't have to go through quarantine or whatever.
Well, it depends. I guess you'd have to be more specific. I haven't thought about what, how many millions of lives is it going to take for me to give up fundamental civil liberties
3 million. This
eternity?
is assuming like a 2% mortality with 150 million people infected, and we're ignoring all the overwhelming of hospitals. We just say like 3 million people die. Also, if you're playing like the long game here, it only took what, 2,000 people dying in 9/11 for a massive erosion of American civil liberties. How much do you
No,
think we'd be
I
willing
agree.
to give up if 3 million people died to a disease? You don't think that would play out worse?
Well, I don't. For one, I don't agree with the Patriot Act and all of the civil liberty violations that occurred post 9/11, and I think that frankly that is a great example that you bring up, because it just shows you every time there's a crisis, the government power expands and our liberty shrinks. And I can't. I don't know if. I guess if you're going to say the 3 million lives, I guess the question would then become, what would be the trade-off? Would that be the federal government literally ordering us to stay in our homes and sending out the military to enforce it? And if it's the federal government ordering us around and using the military to enforce it, then I mean, I would die myself to prevent that from happening. The When you start bringing other people's lives into it, it's like, I probably would say I would rather have the 3 million people die, because more people than that would die from government abuses that occur after this situation.
Why haven't we seen people like run away with this Defense Production Act or whatever if we're so worried about the slippery slope? Why isn't the U.S. government nationalized or taken over parts of businesses to produce weapons and arms for the Iraq War, for the first and second Gulf War, for the Afghanistan War? Like, wouldn't we have
Well,
expected to see if the government was going to do this? Like, wouldn't it have already done so here?
not necessarily. No, I mean, we've had the Constitution is in place, and I think what you've seen, and tell me if you disagree with this, is that as time has gone on and throughout American history, it's been a constant, never-ending expansion of both the power and the scope and the size of the federal government, and a constant reduction in liberty. And so the reason that we haven't had a bunch of these things already happen and a bunch of our liberties already violated is because we just aren't that far along. Looks like we're there though, but it's been a steadily increasing
But
path to
the
get here.
Constitution's still going to be there after like a quarantine. It's not like we're
Yeah,
talking about like
but the
amending the
Constitution's
Constitution.
it's only as good as the people that are willing to enforce it. I mean, places like countries all around the world have constitutions that say the people have rights, and if the government and the people don't abide by it and don't agree, it's not worth anything more than the paper it's written on. And so, I mean, do you disagree with my point though about how throughout American history we've seen a steadily increasing power and scope of the government and a
Well, yeah,
reduction
of
in
course.
liberty?
I think it's a problem that not necessarily a increase of power in the government, but especially in the executive branch, I think is a big problem. Although if you're more of a states guy, then you probably disagree with the legislative extension of power as well. I mean, as somebody that thinks that things like executive orders are probably not a good way to get things done, I mean, that would be another place where I'm so curious how you can be supportive of Trump, who's invoked like times of crisis to do like tariffs or border policy. It seems really strange to me. If you're not worried about like slippery slopes there, even though he does that via executive fiat instead of going through Congress.
Well, Trump has been way less exertive of federal or of executive power than Obama, and I think every president.
That didn't answer my question at all.
Well, it's the well, I was getting there, which was basically to say I think every president, Republican and Democrat, has been expanding the power of the executive branch, and frankly, that's really
You do
not my
also you do
biggest.
know that Trump is on board to do more executive orders than Obama anyway, right? Like he's done 144 so far. Obama issued 276 between two terms. So Trump is already on board to do more. So saying he's done less isn't even
Well,
necessarily true.
but that's
And
not.
also, if we one-to-one compare like different types of executive actions we've done, so for instance, Republicans were very quick to point out how hypocritical Democrats were about travel bans because Barack not only did a travel ban in Iraq, but Trump pulled his travel ban from countries that were already being investigated by the Obama administration. But the difference is when Obama banned travel from Iraq, he did it via Congress, which is how a president should do it. And when Obama was monitoring those 7 countries that were up for the initial Trump travel ban, he didn't go ahead and ban travel from them. He just monitored them. Trump just went ahead and did all of it via executive action. None of that went through Congress. I don't know how that's not worrisome to you if you're so worried about expansion of presidential power.
Okay, well, for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's just comparing the number of executive orders. I think you realize is not sufficient, which is why you actually just talked about the substance of them, because much of Trump's executive orders have been just undoing Obama executive orders. So, I mean, Trump.
Sure, but let's
Trump
talk about
is,
two
but hold
specifically.
on. But
Then.
let me. Okay, so let me
Okay.
talk the specific ones you're talking about. The travel ban that already was empowered by Congress. Congress has already passed statutes saying that if the president deems a country or an alien from anywhere or any class of aliens to be a security risk, that the president has the power to do this. And the Supreme Court upheld the travel ban. The travel ban has been upheld and deemed to be proper and legal. And so, and I don't think so. I don't think an executive order, when it deals with an area where the president has constitutionally delegated authority, such as foreign affairs, enforcing laws like that, things that have to do with the military, national security, foreign policy, etc. I'm okay with that. What the problem that I have with
Okay, you just
Obama's
totally
executive orders is that they weren't in areas that were actually authorized for the president. So DACA, Obama spent years and years and years saying, I can't do DACA. It has to go through Congress. I can't do DACA. It has to go through Congress. And then someday he's like, oh, screw it. I guess I'll just do it. And it's
Okay,
like,
so the two things I'm looking very specifically here. So I'm not going to defend Obama's expansion of presidential powers because obviously it was pretty extensive under his administration. But when we talk about Trump's travel ban, we talk about tariffs. For you to argue that a travel ban was necessary because of national security, which doesn't even really make sense, if we're going to make such a huge roundabout argument for that, how could you argue that quarantining people when we're potentially losing maybe millions of Americans' lives couldn't be a matter of national security? Like, if you're going to say that DACA wasn't a matter of national security, which I don't think Obama claimed it was, because that had to do with immigration, how could you say that Trump running down to the border to build or to get funding for the wall by saying it's a national emergency, how could you say that these two things are dissimilar? Like, I don't understand how
okay,
you can attack Obama
easy,
on the one hand for it and then defend Trump for doing even more extreme manners on the other hand.
easy. You could argue that the virus is a national security issue. The difference is that when Trump does these orders, they apply to non-citizens, non-American citizens wanting to come here. That's not a problem. He's not violating the rights of any Americans. Versus when you do something that actually applies to Americans or
No,
impacts
that's not true.
Americans.
Trump is violating those rights. Absolutely. So for our border, for the things that go on in terms of our immigration policy, right? This is supposed to be legislated by Congress, and Congress is supposed to represent their constituents, which are American citizens. When the president unilaterally takes it upon himself to dictate immigration policy, the president is depriving me, an American citizen, of my right to have a say of what goes on the border. That's absolutely depriving me of my rights. Now, maybe the
No,
immediate
you already
impact
have your
isn't a
right.
Trump. No, I don't. I
Yeah,
can't
you
do
do.
anything about a Trump
Your
executive order.
Well, maybe you could. Your Congress passed the statute that says if the president deems a class of aliens to be a national security threat, then the president can't do that. So his was authorized by statute. DACA was just made out of whole cloth, just completely made up, just literally the president writing basically new statutes. Whereas Trump's travel ban, is literally specifically authorized by a statute that Congress passed. So Congress did have a say in that. Congress was one that told Trump that he could do the travel ban.
Okay, but none of this goes against anything that I've said. Like, when you talk about how the president can just declare arbitrarily some group of people a security threat and say he can ban travel, you are providing such wide deference to the president in terms of how he acts there, which is fine if you want to, but that just seems like such a strange position to take if you're worried about unnecessary expansion of presidential powers. This seems like something that should have went through Congress. When Obama wanted to ban travel from Iraq, he went to Congress to get it done because he had a compelling case to be made. When Trump wanted to ban travel from 7 Muslim majority countries, after explicitly stating he wanted to ban all Muslims from coming to the United States, he just went ahead and did it via executive action. I don't understand how you can't be worried about the slippery slope of executive overreach when Trump's was so much more egregious than Obama's was.
Well, I just disagree that it was more egregious for all the reasons I stated. But more importantly,
wait, what was the reason that made it okay to do it without congressional input? Why should he be allowed to do that when Obama went through Congress for just banning travel from Iraq?
Well, I don't know about the Obama banning travel from Iraq. I was thinking of Obama's DACA order, which was truly egregious of multiple
Maybe
ways.
Obama just did it because of border security. Maybe he thought it'd make the country safer to have these people registered and kept track of. And
come on.
Well, you're saying come on, but like you're giving so much leeway to Trump that is overreached on presidential power to his, like, especially for you. I mean, like, Trump is literally talking about using eminent domain to steal property from private citizens on the border to build the wall. But I'm guessing you're going to defend that, saying, well, it's for national security. But if somebody calls it quarantine, you're ready to go out and die for your rights on the street? Like, man, I don't know. That seems like massively hypocritical or very partisan, at least.
It's not hypocritical at all. First of all, I am opposed to eminent domain abuse, particularly where the government takes private property for like these projects where they're gonna do like a business is going to build a business and it's going to provide jobs. And so that's what the Kelo versus New Connecticut case was about, where it was like taking private property to give to some other private individual. I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with the resident or eminent domain abuse. Taking private property and is specifically allowed under the Constitution if it's for public use, things like a road. I'm not opposed. If the government wants to build a road, if the government wants to build a wall, they can go through the eminent domain process and purchase that land from the private owner at market value, and that's okay. And so Trump doing that on the border is not a problem. But I want to get back to something clarify earlier. When I talk about government power and executive branch power, I'm not talking about executive orders, because the president is actually accountable to the people. The president actually has been elected by the people and has to face election. What I'm talking about when I talk about executive branch power is the administrative state, the bureaucracy, all of these career government officials and all the regulations that they issue. And I think Congress has abdicated its power to these administrative agencies. And so that's where I think the real problem it comes from expansion of government power. Trump is the least authoritarian president we've had in an incredibly long time. Trump is giving us more freedom. Trump is cutting regulations.
What are we worried about? So what are we worried about in terms of, like, are we worried about overreach of the executive or legislative branch, or are we worried about what's constitutional? Which thing here are we focused on?
Well, you think those are different, but like, I think that they're not so dissimilar. But
okay,
both,
in that case, what's your problem with DACA? Because DACA was never ruled unconstitutional. Then you should be just fine with it under Obama.
Well, the Supreme Court never ruled on it, for one.
Okay, so nobody challenged it. So that means until we get a ruling otherwise, DACA is fine. So that means every single executive order, including even the mandate for the ACA, is constitutional. And the ACA one was ran through the Supreme Court. So, like, are you okay with all of those things? Like, you do this thing, or it feels like you're doing a thing where you're saying, well, this is okay because it's constitutional when it comes to Trump, even though these look like really big oversteps to me. I understand the Supreme Court's rationale, though. You don't want to be limiting, like, the wartime powers of a president. But I would be worried about those things. But you seem to be okay with them because they're constitutional. But then you apply a different standard to Obama, where you're saying, well, even if what Obama's doing is strictly legal, I still think it's really worrisome. And I agree, a lot of what happened under Obama was worrisome. Democrats and Republicans alike should say that. But we can't say Trump can do it because it's constitutional, because it is, LOL, and then say, well, Obama did these things and it's bad because in the future it might lead to bad things. You could just as easily argue about all of these executive actions that Trump has taken, that they could lead to bad things in the future as well.
Well, I'm arguing both points. I mean, I'm arguing
Yeah,
it
but we're
on both
bouncing back and
levels.
forth depending on which administration we want to attack or defend. Because we can't
No,
say like,
it's just
well,
so.
Trump can use eminent domain or travel bans because it's constitutional. And I can say, okay, well, DACA and the ACA are constitutional, so we're at the same spot.
Well, you're acting like they're totally different things. They're not. So if the president does an order that literally changes statutory law, then that is both overreach and bad idea and bad policy, and it's also unconstitutional. When Trump does an order to.
That's not true if the Supreme Court defends it, though. By definition, after judicial review became a thing, and the fact that it's in our Constitution is like that just is how it is. If the Supreme Court doesn't challenge it or deny it, unless you're going to take some different interpretation of the Constitution that revokes powers from the Supreme Court or
Okay.
something. I don't
Okay.
know.
Well, so then on this issue, then we have the Supreme Court's only decided on one of these, and it was the Trump order, and they said it's unconstitutional. So, but my point is, let's just forget the Constitution. Let's just talk about whether it's actual overreach. When the president does something that changes law that Congress and the people's elected officials have passed, that's more overreach than when the president does something that's consistent with what the people's elected
Yeah,
representatives
I
have
agree with that
authorized.
100%. So when the American population overwhelmingly voted for Democrats to take office in 2018, for the president to supersede the will of the American people and invoke national security measures to get funding for the wall or to take the military down to the wall or to pass tariffs, I would argue that that's the president overreaching his executive authority to overrule the legislative branch just because he happens to not be in an election time. I don't see how you can't see that as being an overreach of powers. If you want to do tariffs or econ policy like that, that should go through Congress. If you want to do travel bans or border policy, as it has in the past, that should go through Congress.
Well, again, that those have Congress is the one that passed the law that says the president can declare national emergency.
Yeah, but if the president were to go to the border and stub his toe in a rock and say, well, that's a national emergency now, I need to get $50 billion of funding to do something, I don't think you would be okay with that. We're not, remember, you're bouncing back and forth. We're not arguing whether or not the government can. We're arguing if they ought to, right? You wanted to do this separate point as, well, let's just talk about presidential overreach. I'm not talking about like, what does Congress say the president is specifically allowed to do? Yeah, he can invoke, national security measures and do these things, but should he? It doesn't seem like that seems like it's over or superseding the will of the American people at that point.
Well, I disagree. I think the American people elected Trump specifically on immigration issues, and the Republicans and the Democrats in Congress stymied him every step of the way. He listened to bad advice from Paul Ryan and didn't get this done in the first part. And then literally Nancy Pelosi literally shut the government down to try to prevent Trump from building the wall. And it's just like, it was just so much obstruction and just so much insanity that was absolutely the right move. Like, I don't think it should have gotten there.
Yeah, so
but it was the right move.
It's possible that you might hate the United States Constitution. There might be a better form of government, but gridlock is hardcore built into our system. You shouldn't be able to get things through. So then you shouldn't have a problem with this. If they weren't able to get bills out of the House, well, then they didn't have the popular support to do it. That's the whole point of our government. You can't say this was a horrible, application of U.S. Constitution or a horrible application or execution of U.S. political power because things couldn't get out of the House that I agree with. Well, that's just a demonstration of how the system works. Like if Nancy Pelosi was able to shut down the government, that means that Democrats had the political will to do so and the political capital to do it without threatening their position in government. That sounds like an expression of will of the American people, as the U.S. Constitution would see fit to express.
Okay, first of all, the 2018 election can hardly be stated as being the will of the American people because Mueller refused to shut down that fake investigation of a hoax, of the Russia collusion hoax. And so the 2018 election had the Mueller investigation hanging over it, and that turned out to be a complete lie, complete hoax. And so that's really why the 2018 election came out. Well, hold on, let me make one other point.
Do you think, well, if you're going to bring up this point, do you think Hillary Clinton should be president? Because Comey basically tanked her chances. Well, why? But Comey came out and absolutely was the kill shot to Hillary's campaign.
Yeah, but Comey wasn't coming out and saying out and out lies and a completely fake allegation against Hillary Clinton. Those were genuine
What fake allegations did Mueller make himself?
Well, the whole Mueller investigation was investigating a false allegation.
It doesn't matter if an allegation is true or false. You investigate. Like whether
Yeah,
it
but
turns
they
out to
knew
be
it.
true or
No,
false,
but the problem
you know
is,
that the only way to know if it's true or false is to do an investigation.
I know,
Firstly,
but
secondly,
my
the Mueller investigation turned out a lot of really good indictments. Whether or not it personally involved Trump, there was still a lot of good things that came out of the investigation.
those were
Also,
no,
it
those were
wasn't
jokes.
just Comey. No, they were really good.
They just dismissed them. The indictments were just dismissed recently. Those were jokes of a case.
Which indictments were dismissed? The ones against all of the Russian actors?
Not all of them, but some of them were just recently dismissed. Yes. Those
Okay,
were
I would
complete
have to
jokes.
see.
They're never going to get those Russians. Like, come on.
Whoa! That's a different argument on whether they're going to get him or not. But the investigation turned up a lot of good information about how they got into the DNC servers, about the people that were in charge of disseminating that information.
But it's not worth it. It wasn't worth it. They didn't need a special counsel for that. The only reason you need
who else would have had jurisdiction to investigate?
Regular DOJ. The only reason you have a special counsel is to go after the president, so the president's own DOJ is not investigating him. That's the whole purpose behind it. You know, the entire Mueller thing was about Trump-Russia collusion. Turned out to be fake.
What about
Mueller knew it was
that, like, how many people around Trump ended up going to jail? Were all the charges against Manafort fake? Were all the charges against Flynn fake? Were all the charges against Roger Stone fake? Like, what do you mean? Like, these people are in prison.
Destiny,
like,
come on, you know exactly what happened.
How many people?
There.
How many people went to prison? How many people went to prison over the email investigation over Benghazi? Like, how are you going to say that these were good investigations, but the Mueller investigation was completely a hoax? You have to be playing partisan politics here, because for how many years did I have to hear about Hillary's emails about Benghazi? How many hours of testimony did she sit in front of Congress for Benghazi, and nothing came of it? And you're going to say that the Mueller investigation that turned out how many of Trump's own cabinet members or administration going to jail, that was a hoax? How could you possibly have these two positions?
Well, it's quite clear, and what everything you just said calls into question the integrity of the DOJ and the FBI and the CIA. That's what it does, is it calls into the integrity of the career officials in DOJ. That's all it is. More importantly,
some of these guys are Trump's own appointments.
The reason that Trump's associates like Cohen and whoever else got caught is because the Mueller investigation was the most trumped up fake thing, and it was the most wide-ranging investigation ever, way more wide-ranging, way more intrusive than any investigation of any Democrat ever. And it's the swamp. You're talking about people that made their living in Washington D.C. in the swamp. If you had hold on, let me finish. If you had a Mueller style investigation into Democrats, you'd find just as many bad things. But you know what? Every single one of these that came out of the Mueller investigation, Trump ought to pardon every single one of them, because it's fruit.
How do you think Bill Clinton got caught with Lewinsky? You know that wasn't an investigation into Bill Clinton for sexual assault, right? That came off of a totally different and unrelated investigation. What do you mean? Like, this is the worst example you could possibly use to say that these don't happen to Trump.
That was an independent counsel. That wasn't career DOJ or law enforcement.
And Mueller's team brought people from litigation that were far outside of government. A lot of these people left private practices to go and work under Mueller here.
They were mostly Democrats, and including their main prosecutor was like a longtime Democrat. I know his name. I can't think of it right now, but dude, I can't believe you're actually going to defend the integrity of the Mueller investigation. Come on, man. They knew.
Mueller himself was a huge Republican. So was Comey. Like,
okay, so now Destiny's position is, if you're a Republican, you're a great guy. You have integrity if you're a Republican. Come on, man.
I never said that, but you're using the political parties
Mueller
of these
on the basis
people.
That he's a Republican.
I didn't defend him on that basis, because I think just pointing to the political party of someone is dumb. You were trying to dismiss them on the basis that they were Democrats, but Mueller himself and Comey, the head of the FBI, were both Republicans. So I'm only attacking your point that political parties can be used to dismiss people by showing you that Republicans were involved in these investigations as well.
Well, then not all Republicans are good people. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, but whose fault is that? Where did Sessions come from? Where did Rosenstein come from? Like, the new FBI like, a lot of these people were Trump appointees that ended up being bad people. Like, I don't understand how Trump can run as being a businessman, but I can't hold him accountable for any of these things. The whole point of being a business person is that I can hold you accountable for something. Like, this is true of my own employees. Like, if I get people working for me that are just blaming underlings, like, I would fucking fire you. I'm not going to sit here and tolerate all of these excuses. And it's the same thing with a CEO of a company as well. You can't blame your underlings.
Blame Trump for what? Like, Okay, fine. Trump is responsible for his underlings. For what? What did they do?
For surrounding him. I mean, what did Manafort do? His longtime associations with was it the Ukrainian leader? All of the weird shit that he had involved with that. For Roger Stone and the fucked up shit that he was involved in with Flynn for lying under oath. I mean, these are all people that Trump surrounded himself with apparently all of the useless people that he's appointed to. Jeff Sessions recusing himself, Rosenstein not taking a hard enough stance. Like, these are all Trump appointees that just apparently did a horrible job because they're part of the swamp, even though they're Trump's own appointees.
Okay, right.
I don't understand.
All right. If your criticism of Trump is that Trump should have been more aggressive in trying to drain the swamp, Trump should have never made the deal with the RNC and the leader of the RNC. What's that guy's name? Really weird name. The leader. I can't think of the guy's name. But so when Trump came into office, yeah, he did try to work within the swamp, because it's very difficult to be a complete outsider and come in, and you literally have to fill thousands and thousands of positions. And how are you going to fill thousands and thousands of positions in the swamp without drawing from the swamp? So if your criticism is Trump drew too much from the swamp and choosing people, fine. But if you think that somehow Trump is a bad president or more corrupt than any Democrat because of all of these sort of minor issues that they got pulled up from Mueller, it's like, dude, the Democrats would have 10 times worse of stuff if we had wide-ranging, unlimited, multi-million-dollar, 50 prosecutors going after Democrats and digging up literally everything. I mean, they dig up everything on Trump. They've looked at all of his... And they've looked at everything. They raided his lawyer's office, for God's sakes. Trump doesn't even have attorney-client privilege anymore. I mean, this stuff.
Yeah. So when you talk about like draining the swamp, it seems more like Trump just brought his own swamp in. Like Trump wasn't pulling these super qualified people from, like Tillerson wasn't part of the swamp. Cohen was his personal lawyer. That guy wasn't part of the swamp. Like, how can you? Like Betsy DeVos, was she part of the swamp? Like, I don't understand how you're getting
wrong.
No, but she's a joke. Everything she talks about is embarrassing. What are her qualifications for even doing a job? She's the wife of the guy that founded Amway. Like, General Mattis now is apparently part of the swamp and the deep state. Like, as soon as these people turn on Trump, like one day I'll have the news on and Trump will be talking about how amazing somebody like Cohen is, and then the next day about how horrible he is. Like, how many people has he turned his back on and done this to? Like, he has no one to blame but himself.
Well, Trump hasn't done anything wrong. I mean, he's had to weather one of the most severe and unfair false allegations and hoaxes after him and obstruction and everything. And yeah, Trump's had some people come and go. Fine. But you know what? Trump's still gotten a lot done. And
Trump hasn't really gotten anything done outside of like the tax
way
cuts?
Better than anybody.
Wait,
Trump's
outside
got
of like
done. Are you kidding me?
What all has Trump accomplished that were major Republican like agenda items besides the tax cuts and I guess some prison reform a little bit? Like what else has Trump accomplished?
Okay, tons. Trump has put more judges in the judiciary than almost any other president. Incredible movement in terms of putting judges and justices on the courts.
Appointing judges and justices are things that every president does. But okay, go ahead.
He's done more regulation cutting than any other president ever has. He's totally freed up American energy. American energy has been in an absolute blowout. We're now not only energy independent, but we're energy dominant. Like on and on and on. And foreign policy, he's done a great job rebuilding the military. It's just honestly.
Okay, so like in a lot of these, we would have to go. Like I guess we would have to talk. Like I don't know which regulations Trump has cut that's massively benefiting the American people. I know I've seen a lot of very weird like EPA regulations that have gotten rolled back that are highly questionable. In terms of freeing up American energy, obviously he has one stance on energy policy that's going to be favorable towards energy policy because he doesn't believe that global warming is real. I don't know if we could argue that those are good things. In terms of foreign policy, Trump's foreign policy has been an absolute disaster.
No way.
The legitimizing of Kim Jong-il on the global stage, the pulling out of the Iran deal, like almost everything, like making enemies of almost every single U.S. ally abroad, constantly attacking NATO, one of the most important American like foreign policy like institutions. Like I don't know how you can say Trump's done a good job on foreign policy at all.
Trump's done a great job on foreign policy. I mean, it's really rich to hear somebody from the left now accuse a Republican of being bad on foreign policy because they're engaged in diplomacy. I thought you leftists loved
the Iran deal, that was diplomacy? Leaving the Iran deal was diplomacy? Abandoning the Kurdish people to Turkey was... No, wait, what? Presidents have historically never met
Wow.
with
So
the North Korean leaders.
you're gonna criticize Trump for being an anti-war president? Wow, unbelievable! I can't believe
Wait,
this
how
is an
is
issue
polling-
that Democrats should be praising Trump up and down and left and right and saying Trump is the best president ever. Trump is the most anti-war
Wait,
president we've ever
Trump is
had,
the
and you
best
guys are
president for what?
criticizing. He's been the most anti-war. Are you anti-war? Or are you like a big warmonger guy? I assume you're
I'm not-
anti-war more so
I
than
don't know what
most.
anti-war means. I mean, it would depend on the conflict. But like Trump meeting with North Korea's head of state didn't accomplish anything. He just
Yeah, it
met
did.
with him and gave him a photo op.
Yeah,
No,
it
it
actually-
didn't. They absolutely didn't.
It stopped.
It didn't stop
tests
anything.
and
No,
yes,
it didn't.
did.
They went right back to them. What are you talking about?
They have done
went
some,
back to
but
spinning up their
it-
centrifuges. They went right back to doing testing. They secured absolutely zero promises from North Korea in any of the meetings they had. Our own State Department complained about it. The fact that literally nothing happened with North Korea. There were zero promises or agreements made between North Korea and the United States as a result of those meetings.
Well, look, North Korea is definitely one of the most intractable problems. To expect Trump to like solve the North Korean problem is preposterous. When
We're not expecting him to solve it. Just he didn't have to give them a photo op.
Bill Clinton is the one that actually made a deal with North Korea, signed deal, and said North Korea is giving up its nukes in the 90s. So, like, to use North Korea as, like, your big attack on Trump foreign policy is preposterous. Like, literally, Donald Trump has done, he's one of the only presidents that we've had in modern history that has not gotten us into a war. He's ended wars. He's been very, very restrained in use of the military force, and he's bringing troops home. And the Democrats are crying that Donald Trump is bringing the troops home and ending wars and not starting wars. This just shows the disingenuousness of all of these attacks on Trump from the left. Trump's anti-war foreign policy, bringing troops home, very restrained use of the military, not starting wars, all of this stuff. We should be praising him up, down, left, and right, and center.
I don't understand you can say this when, like, 2 months ago, we thought we were going to be in World War III because Trump literally assassinated a foreign leader in an allied airport.
That was
like
the
we gave up.
Best move ever. That reduced
You're
tensions.
so partisan. It's insane. Oh
No,
my God.
that literally was a very smart move. Dude, this was another example of the Democrats' predictions being completely wrong. Just like saying, "Oh, if Trump moves the American embassy to
How do you think
Jerusalem,
that
it's going
killing-
to cause a huge,
how do you think
massive
that-
war in the Middle East," and then
How do you
saying
think
that
that
killing
bombing?
this guy
How do you think
is
that
gonna
bombing the airport of an ally is a good, strong foreign policy move?
Because that guy was one of the worst terrorists in the world, and he was spreading terror all around the Middle East. And you know what? Ever since that Trump did that, guess what? Tensions have been much lower in the Middle East, haven't they?
Well, after the bombings of some embassies initially, after the downing of an Iranian plane, like, I mean, how are you going to say
reduced
that
tensions.
if this is something that was so good, then why couldn't Trump have reached out to our Iraqi allies first?
Well, because unfortunately, when Obama pulled out of Iraq, he left the power vacuum that was fulfilled by both Al-Qaeda and Iran. And so the Iraqi government basically is controlled a lot by Iran. And then there were huge chunks of Iraq that were controlled by the terrorist groups when Trump took over.
Sure.
So Trump has taken out the terrorist groups,
Okay.
got Iraq back to actually having control of its country instead of the terrorists, and
I don't know-
drastically reduced Iran's power and influence. Iran is now teetering on the edge of collapse. All we're looking for is another green movement like happened in 2009 in Iran,
talking
and
about a green
that government's
movement. Okay.
gone, and it's going to be the greatest accomplishment of any president ever.
You said, okay, so do you think that first of all, Obama pulled out of Iraq on Bush's timeline? I'll be generous and say, well, Obama maybe could have extended it. So what do you think that Obama pulled out of Iraq early? Why? Because the government wasn't stable enough to hold itself off from like other like terrorist groups in the country?
Yes, Obama pulled out.
So then how do you feel about Trump
military
pulling out of
advice.
Afghanistan and giving it over to the Taliban?
That's a tough one because I'm concerned that it's not going to be successful. The thing about Afghanistan is, look, we all want to end the war. We've been there for 20 years. It's kind of ridiculous. What my proposal has always been, and I'm not sure if Trump agrees with this. I kind of think he does, and if he does, then I'm going to be okay with it. Bring the troops home, pull out, but as soon as they start creating terrorist camps and training for terrorists and launching terrorist attacks then we can just bomb them. We don't need to have troops there. So again, Trump is ending a 20-year war, and Democrats are criticizing. It's mind-blowing.
So, firstly, it's really hard to just quote unquote bomb the terrorists, right? That's not really how the geography of Afghanistan plays itself out to
right,
be.
they got caves. Yeah, they got caves.
Secondly, we all want to end the war. We've been there for 20 years. It's ridiculous. Why couldn't Obama have just used your excuse then for pulling the troops out of Iraq?
Well, the thing with the Iraq situation is that we actually had status of forces agreements with the Iraqi government under Bush, and then Barack Obama didn't even negotiate another status of forces agreement with Iraq, and then pulled out against all military advice and way too soon. And it was 100% political. And he had promised.
And what do you think pulling out of Afghanistan now is, against the warning of every single military expert that Afghanistan is going to fall to the Taliban almost immediately? That there's no chance that government maintains itself. You don't think that's political at all? Trump trying to end wars?
Well, I'm sure it is. But so I guess, am I understanding this right? That you think that the U.S. military should remain in Afghanistan?
I think that our foreign policy has been ridiculously butch in Afghanistan. I don't know. I don't know what a clear direction for it. It would require like a top-down, complete realignment of our mission in Afghanistan, because it seems like we don't really have one and haven't had one for the past 20 years we've been there. I mean, I would like to see.
Well, you're criticizing him, but what's your idea?
I mean, I guess we need to figure out is, do we want the Taliban to exist in Afghanistan or not? If we do, then we probably should have taken a much more aggressive measure of eliminating them from Afghanistan. If we don't, then we probably should have just tried to cut a deal with them and never gone in the first place. It has to be one of those two options. But just sitting in some parts of Afghanistan and pouring, hundreds of millions, billions? Tens of billions of dollars into that country. Was it $1 trillion? Did we spend $1 trillion in Afghanistan? It's an astronomical number. Spending that much money for no results, whatever your position would have been, it was not the way to go. In terms of sorry, hold on, I don't hear that. In terms of what our path forward should be, I don't know enough about the existence of the Taliban in that region to know if that's an organization that I would want completely removed or not. So I don't have a strong opinion one way or another if the Taliban continues to exist or operate out of Afghanistan.
Okay. Huh. I figured you would, since you're so viciously criticizing Trump pulling out of Afghanistan, which it's just...
Well, no, I wasn't. I'm not so much criticizing his pulling out of Afghanistan. I just think it's strange that him pulling out of Afghanistan, every possible rationale that he could use there would have been used by Obama for pulling out of Iraq. But because it feels like you play these issues in a very partisan manner, where if Trump does it, it's okay, even if he does it with the same rationale that Obama does it.
Well, they're different. They're different countries. There's different situations.
The situations are roughly comparable. They're countries that can't stand on their own, that are being threatened by other terrorist organizations. That the United States only being
The main difference is Afghanistan is dirt poor. Iraq has boatloads of wealth. That's the huge difference. That's the only reason Saddam Hussein ever had any powers, because Iraq has a capability of being a very wealthy country. So you're talking about
Afghanistan is the largest exporter of Afghanistan is the largest exporter of opium in the world. I don't think that country necessarily has to be a poor country. I think it just so happens that the Taliban is the one that's in charge of most of those exports right now.
Well, let's just put it this way: Afghanistan's not going to be having a nuclear weapons program anytime soon.
No, but Iran might. Since we pulled out of the Iranian deal, it's possible.
Well, the Iranian deal is actually helping them get closer and closer to
how?
A nuke. In fact, the pulling out of the Iran nuke deal is actually doing the most we can to not only prevent them from getting a weapon. The way that the Iran nuke deal helped out Iran build a nuke is because it freed up all of their money, all of their economy, to be used on other things that they were previously using on their nuke program. It had no inspection requirements, and so
it absolutely had inspection requirements. The UN had 24/7 access to a lot of their nuclear plants, and they had passed every single inspection with flying colors. What do you mean it had no inspection process? That was one of the whole points of the Iranian nuclear deal.
There had to be notice given beforehand, and you had to trust the Iranians that they were being honest about where their nuke stuff was. And it's like,
there was some notice given beforehand, sure, but you can't just hide the 200 to 300 centrifuges required to enrich uranium because you know that the UN is on their way, especially in this day when we have satellite surveillance over everything. They're not just packing these things into their like Chevy Silverados and just driving them down the street so the UN investigators can't find them. That's not how this type of enrichment technology
Well,
works.
they were also able to continue nuclear capability. They,
Well, because we
for
wanted
power.
them to. Yeah, because the technology required to enrich uranium for weapons capability uranium is vastly different than the tech required for nuclear power, and we didn't want to prevent them from going to secure nuclear power. Those the types of technologies are totally different between the two.
Look, the bottom line is Iran is our mortal enemy. They're a part of the axis of evil. They're one of the worst.
Iran doesn't
regimes
have
on
to be
Earth.
our mortal enemy. They're only our mortal enemy because you say so. Why do they have to be our mortal enemy?
They're literally the #1 state sponsor of terrorism. They want the United States wiped off the map. They want our allies wiped off the map. They're a despicable regime. And the Iranian deal propped them up and gave them a bunch of money. A U.S. policy in Iran should be to support the Iranian people who do not want the mullahs in control over there, which is why you saw the Green Movement in 2009. You just recently this year saw more mass protests. And we should be supporting the Iranian people in their attempts to actually get rid of this theocracy.
Because of Iran's history with the United States, the Iranian people hate the United States. So whatever they hate the United States. So whatever new institution pops up in Iran, we wouldn't expect that to be any more friendly than any other institution that would be there towards U.S. interests. If anything, they'd be more extreme against them, especially with all the aggravation that comes from everybody south of them in the Gulf, all the Sunni states.
Would you at least prefer not to have an Islamic theocracy in control there?
Saudi Arabia is an Islamic theocracy, and they're one of our closest allies. Why do we care? That's not. We both know that that's not relevant because you're not going to start to criticize Qatar and the UAE and Saudi Arabia and for all these other countries for being ran by Muslims.
Well, I would criticize them for that reason, but I'm also a realist when it comes to foreign policy and countries that are our allies. We're our allies, and the countries that hate us and want us to destroy us and kill us and are supporting terrorism worldwide.
Yeah, but Iran was so close. Iran was so close to being our ally before Bush said they were on the axis of evil. And the idea that we would take this ultra hard line, yeah, absolutely they were. And the idea that they would take this ultra hard line approach to Iran, and then you would tell me that, well, it's okay to go ahead and be buddy-buddy with Kimmy in North Korea because that's good foreign policy. Like, how do you ever decide what's good and what's bad? It feels like it's whatever Trump does ends up being good through some weird mental gymnastics, but everything else that, Obama would have done is bad. Like, that's, I don't understand.
Look, I'm not necessarily a huge defender of meeting with Kim Jong-un. In fact, are you proud that Trump got rid of ISIS? I've always, and Republicans have always said we shouldn't have presidential meetings with dictators because it legitimizes them. We don't get much in return. That's been traditional Republican, conservative, realist foreign policy. And so it's just really rich to hear people on the left now criticizing Trump for diplomacy and not being more of a hardcore conservative realist on foreign policy. It's like, this is why all of your criticisms of Trump, you're like coming at Trump from the right and pretending to be a leftist. It's like, it's not working.
The problem is there's zero consistency. Like, on one hand, you're bragging to me that Trump was able to clean up ISIS, and you're so proud of that. And then on the other hand, you're saying, fuck Iran because they're horrible people. But it's okay to have meetings with Kim Jong-il or Kim Jong-un, but it's bad to be friends with Iran because our allies to the south and the Gulf states hate Iran. But those allies in the south are the ones funding ISIS that you're so proud that Trump eliminated. There's no direction here whatsoever. It's literally just at the end of the day, if Trump does it good, if Obama did it bad, and like that's your only thought process for how do you shore up our support for the Gulf states when they were the ones supporting ISIS, but you're also happy that we eliminated ISIS? Like, how do you reconcile that in your head?
Look, the way you reconcile a lot of this stuff is that a lot of times in foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East, you don't have a wonderful option. You have two bad options. And so you just choose the one that's less bad. It's not like we have these wonderful choices to make in the Middle East on our foreign policy. And so you're going to be able to criticize any foreign policy decision that America makes in the Middle East because literally you're stuck with multiple bad options. You can do something bad, you can do something terrible, and you can do something really terrible.
No, that's not true. I think as a general goal towards Middle Eastern policy, I think that it's okay to try to build more relationships in the Middle East. Now, our allies down there wouldn't like that. So, for instance, we've got a lot of problems with our buddies in Saudi Arabia having any thing to do with people in Iran, right? But technically, having these countries as being friends of the United States would be massively beneficial to U.S. global interests, 100%. Being on the same page as Iraq, that's why we invest so much in Iraq. Like, why would we care about that country otherwise, if not to just prevent that three-way union between Syria, Iraq, and Iran, if not to prevent all of these people from working together, right? Like, our whole point should be gathering up allies in that region. The Iran deal was a really good step in that direction of getting on more normalized relations with Iran. The idea that we would just walk away from that and get nothing in return is ridiculous.
No, it's not, because we didn't get much in return in the first place. And the only thing that we got in return is a hope that the Iranian radical Islamic theocracy is going to someday be our friends. I mean, if you really,
all we got from North Korea was a hope. We had no deals with North Korea. All we got was a hope. North Korea was testing missiles this week. That was the definition of going somewhere and only getting hope. The Iran deal was enforced by the UN. We had inspectors, multiple countries that went into that country and said things were okay. That was a good deal. And it was working to normalize relationships between the United States and Iran. Like, if anything,
you're not going to normalize those relations. I'm sorry. That's just not possible. That's
impossible to do so.
You're not going to normalize relations between in a radical Islamic theocracy that has religious beliefs that call for the destruction of America and the United States.
What about a radical monarchy that calls for the destruction of America? Look, the U.S. and Japan are two of the closest allies in the world now. And by the end of World War II, we were at each other's throats. I don't know if you remember this, but we literally nuked them twice. So if we can be friends with Japan, I think it's possible. We could probably work towards normalizing relationships with Iran. If we could do it to Japan, I think we could do it to Iran.
We replaced the Japanese government. We wrote their constitution. We had a military
and we've replaced the Iranian government once as well, and that didn't work out too well for the United States either.
Actually, it did. The United States won the Cold War.
Because we replaced Iran's government?
That was part of it.
I don't think that's the principal reason why we won the Cold War. We won the Cold War because the USSR never had the broad support in the region that the United States did from European countries. The idea that we won that war because we tried to flip Iran is absolutely not true.
Well, that's not what I said. But my point is that was part of our Cold War strategy. And most of what the United States did in terms of toppling governments in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s was all Cold War strategy.
No.
Yes, it was.
We went into Iran because the British were begging us to save their company, their oil company that Iran nationalized, because Great Britain nationalized one of their oil companies that was initially privately owned, that was working out of Iran, that controlled like 50% of their oil. And the United Kingdom, Great Britain, would not respond to any of Iran's attempts to negotiate with them for oil prices. They nationalized that private company. So the United Kingdom literally had control over Iran's oil fields. And Great Britain, because they were so fucking sad, Britain was so fucking mad about it, they begged the United States to go in there and help them overthrow the government on top of all the political turmoil going on. That's why we went into Iran. The idea that we went there as part of Cold War strategy, Iran was never even aligned with the USSR. Like, the USSR imploded because of their inability to run their economy and for a variety of other diplomatic reasons. Iran had nothing to do with that.
It did. What you're missing, you made the point that there was political turmoil in Iran at the time, and that's absolutely right. And
the political turmoil was caused by the
U.S. concern was that communists were going to take over in Iran. And you're right, it had to do with the oil and all of that, which you can't deny the realistic straight up national security concerns of the United States and its allies. But the United States also used as a justification for that was that, oh my God, more communists are going to take over. This is when the domino theory was in place, and the U.S. was concerned that if every country that went communist at that time was going to be another country that was allied with the USSR. That was certainly a role that played in U.S. policymakers' minds at the time.
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure it was pressure because we'd had a lot of opportunities to go into that country and do things earlier. It wasn't until the United Kingdom was begging us to come in and help them because of the disaster that they'd caused nationalizing their oil fields that we ever even considered doing it. Like, it was even to the detriment of the U.S. economy. Like, I'm pretty sure, well,
yeah, it's not going to be good for the U.S. if communists take over a bunch of oil fields in Iran during the height of the Cold War. Look,
I
you can second guess all you want whether that was a good idea or
no, I just saying
whether
that.
Vietnam was a good idea. But the point is that the United States exerted its influence throughout the world all through the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, mostly as part of the Cold War, and the United
Well,
States won
sure,
the
but
Cold
the
War,
original point
and then for
was
multiple
that
reasons.
the original point was that the very original point we brought this up is because Iran doesn't have a very favorable view towards the United States because of our involvement in that coup and because of the failure of that government thereafter. That a lot of Iranians, at least older Iranians, I think younger ones might
Right.
be a tad more
The
critical of the
younger
U.S.
ones are, yeah, and a lot of it too is because government propaganda that the Iranian government puts out. The point is, though,
You
is
don't
that
need
even
much
if
propaganda in that region of the world to hate the United States when we're friends with ISIS. It doesn't really work that way,
what
right?
are you
Like
talking about, friends with ISIS? We've taken out ISIS.
when we're literally signing multi-billion arms deals with Saudi Arabia, who is funding a lot of the Sunni extremism that exists in that region, it's pretty easy to hate the United States. It's not a hard thing to do. When we're literally in charge of all these drone strikes that are going on in these war-torn places and places like Lebanon, like it's pretty easy to shit on the United States. You don't need to invent a lot of propaganda to do that.
Well, the real reason I think that they hate us is because we're friends with Israel, not
Well, I
because
mean
we're
that's somebody that they have conflicts with the region with as well. Yeah, Israel and the Gulf states, of course, sure.
yeah, and so this is another thing that leftists always do is
Well, but like,
they
well, hold on,
you
stop
want
calling
to
them
hold
leftist.
on, you want to act as if American foreign policy should or success or failure in American foreign policy should be decided on whether radical Islamic terrorists in the Middle East like us or not. That's not
It
what
is, though. That's why we're
not.
friends with Saudi Arabia. That's where the 9/11 hijackers came from. That's where most of the funding for the Sunni extremists. Those are radical Islamic terrorists, and we mark our ability to be successful in the Middle East as our relationship with them. So yes, it's just which flavor of radical Islamic terrorism do you want to go with? We fall on the Sunni side. Those three states in the middle, Iraq, Syria, and Iran, tend to fall on the Shia side. Like you can't sit here and pretend like we've got the high road because we're friends with a state that just literally bragged about letting women learn how to drive 2 years ago. Like I don't think that's a strong position to take.
Well, it is because there's costs and benefits to all of these decisions, and the United States has long been a supporter of human rights worldwide. And
No, we
we've had to
don't
make tough
care about.
decisions.
No.
It's a tough world
If
out
that's
there, and
true,
we
then
have
why
to
didn't we
make.
punish Saudi Arabia for literally chainsawing up that Khashoggi, whatever that
Khashoggi,
guy's
yeah.
name was? Khashoggi. Yeah. I mean, we did nothing about that. Like, don't tell me we're in favor of
real.
human rights.
That's realism. Yes, the United States has been more in favor of human rights than any other country in the world. No, we're not
No.
perfect. No, not all of our
We're in
allies are
favor of
perfect.
defending our geopolitical interests afar. That's what the United States is concerned with. And even from a geopolitical interest, we seem
We've
to have a
done
bad position on this.
we've done tons of stuff worldwide to support freedom movements and everything else. And not only that,
Only when it's
just
in U.S.
serving.
interest.
Well, and there's nothing wrong with that either. The U.S. should be looking out for its own interests. My original point is that you measure our success in foreign policy by how secure America is, not by
Sure,
whether,
I agree
not
with
by
that.
whether
But
people
don't
in the
tell
Middle
me
East
then.
like
Yeah,
us or not.
yeah, I
You're
agree with
never
that.
going to
But
get
don't
them to
tell me.
like
Wait,
us.
wait. You can't tell me. First of all, absolutely, we can get countries to like us, but you can't tell me in one breath that we're trying to reduce human suffering on the world, and then the next day we're defending U.S. interests here and abroad. Those are two like missions that don't always line up with one another.
Well, not
For
always,
instance,
but
how
you
are
can
you
do
okay?
both.
Not necessarily. You have to prioritize one over the other. For instance, what about us abandoning the Kurdish people in Syria, where we just pulled out and we were like, "See ya." Like, how do you justify
Again,
Trump being
okay.
okay with that? How do you justify Trump's travel ban that caused some Iraqi citizens that we had promised visas to for helping us eradicate ISIS in Iraq? We promised visas to these people, and they actually couldn't get it because Trump's travel ban stopped that. Like, to say that Trump has had a good foreign policy outlook in the Middle East is just hilariously misinformed. How many generals has he gone through? Like, how many different mission plans have we had regarding some of these countries? Like, how unclear is our vision from the top in terms of who are we friendly with and who are we not friendly with? You know, one day we're supporting people that are killing ISIS. The next day we pull out and we completely abandon them and leave them to the mercy of other U.S. allies. Like, how can you say we have a consistent and clear vision of what's going on in the Middle East?
Well, hey, one way we can tell, we haven't been hit by a terrorist attack that was planned and administered from the Middle
No.
East.
That's your mark for success, is whether or not a terrorist attack has happened.
Is that not one of our most important foreign policy interests in the
That's
Middle East
who
right now? Is
cares
preventing
about
terrorism?
terrorism. That's a little boy issue for stoking fears at home. Our broader concerns should be who is representing American interests abroad, who lets us have airports or missile defense or attack silos in their country, who can we get into organizations like NATO. These are the big boy ways of measuring the success of U.S. foreign policy, not how many terrorist
Okay,
attacks. Anybody can do a terrorist
on
attack.
those measures, Trump has been just fine. I mean, the thing
Okay, then
is that
Obama was
our
successful as well then because we didn't have terrorist attacks under Obama.
I'll give Obama credit for not having terrorist attacks in the U.S. mainland for that. Good for him.
But that's not even Obama. That's not even to Obama's credit, though. Like Obama didn't do that. Like if anything, Obama was stoking fears internationally. It could have led to more
Okay,
terrorist
so
attacks.
well, first of all, I thought your gauge of success of foreign policy was whether people in the Middle East liked us. Now you're saying it's how many bases we're allowed to have over there.
Well, we only set
on
up
that
bases that the
standard,
people in the
we've got
country
tons
like
of
us.
bases every. No, that's if the
Except our
government
relationship
likes us or not.
The government is oftentimes a reflection of the will of the people to some
Not in the
extent.
Middle East. No, it's
To
not.
some extent, of course it is. Yeah.
Not
You
really.
literally were just telling me that you're waiting for the Iranian people to overthrow the government, probably because you think that if the government doesn't represent the will of the people to some extent, they're going to be overthrown.
Well,
So to some extent,
I don't think the Iranian government represents the will of the people, which is why they continue to have mass protests. And we should be supporting the Iranian people, not propping up the disgusting Iranian government.
okay. All right. Do you have any final? Is there like a final topic you want to go over? I feel like we can go back and forth on this all night. So give me one final one that we can do.
Ooh, I don't know. What else is I don't know.
Do you think that the U.S. should be friends with Saudi Arabia?
Oh, I don't think we have much of a choice at the moment. I think we really kind of have to.
But by that logic, we couldn't be friends with like Iran.
No, because guess what? The Saudi Arabian government is not publicly calling for the destruction of the United States and our allies like the Iranian government is.
Okay.
I mean, that's just indisputable.
Okay.
I don't know. We could do economics or social issues or.
Oh, sure. Here's one final good one. Do you think that the United States should give $1,000 to $2,000 checks to all American families so that they can stay afloat
Oh,
during
God.
the shutdown?
Well, what I think is despicable is the Democrats blocking aid to Americans during the coronavirus shutdown. But my view on that is that no, I don't. I'm opposed to bailouts and stimulus packages and everything else. If I was president or governor or whatever else, we wouldn't need to be having this because I wouldn't have purposefully crashed and shut down the U.S. economy. I think the government needs to massively cut spending, not.
Well, what about for
increase
our
spending.
airports? That wasn't due to the U.S. shutting down travel. That was due to a lot of European countries shutting down travel as well. So, like, what do you do in case of the airports? Do you bail them out, or do you just let them all go under? And we
I
just have
don't
no.
know. I do not support bailouts by the federal government. I don't think airports would go under. And if they did go under, then what happens is they declare bankruptcy, and then other investors in the bankruptcy court buy up the land and all the airplanes and start a new business. I don't know.
Why would they?
No, I
If the
don't
businesses
support-
aren't profitable, why would they start? Why would they restart them if they weren't making money?
Well, because presumably the people are going to start flying again, and they will be able to make money again.
Yeah, but airlines already barely make money or don't, depending on the airline you're looking at. Like airlines are already like have so much trouble staying afloat because of how tight the industry is.
No, I agree. Of course, yeah, they are on very thin margins. I just don't think that's the job of the federal government to bail out.
Whose job is it if not the federal government?
It's nobody. You don't bail out businesses. If a business has no, if they're operating on the line and then a crisis hits and they go bankrupt, we have bankruptcy courts. That's what bankruptcy court is for.
Okay, so let's say I can present you with three choices. I'm curious what you would take. So one is we have bailouts and airlines remain relatively unchanged. The second one is we have no bailouts and airline traffic just for the most part disappears, except for very niche cases. Or we have no bailouts, but airline traffic is significantly curbed because the price of all tickets is like 2 or 3 times as much. Which one of these is like most preferable to you?
I guess the last one.
Okay, so you would be okay significantly curbing the ability of American people to travel
I just
from
don't
place
think
to
that
place.
I just don't think that would happen.
Well, but it would have to. For them to be able to survive a crisis like this, they would have to be hoarding so much cash or operating on much higher margins for them to be able to do it. And the only way to increase your margins is to either cut costs, which airlines do aggressively, or to increase revenues, which would mean charging more for
Well,
tickets.
no, because what I'm suggesting is if the airlines, there's no customers, nobody's flying. Let's say they're headed to bankruptcy. What happens is the airlines have tons of debt, tons of bonds, tons of regular loans, etc. So the airlines then file bankruptcy in bankruptcy court, and you know who gets royally screwed? All of the bondholders and all of the investors and all of the banks that have loaned them money. Those guys all eat it in the shorts or take it in the shorts, and then other investors, people who have money, go into the bankruptcy court. They buy up all the airplanes. They buy up all the other assets for very, very
Well,
cheap.
no, no, no,
And
no,
then
no,
they
no, no.
restart the
And,
business,
well,
and
no, no,
boom,
no,
we're
no, no,
back
no,
on
no.
operations.
Hold on. You said you do civil litigation or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So a really standard part of bankruptcy is I think it's your Class A investors are paid back with like liquidating assets. There's no way that you can file bankruptcy, protect all of your assets, and then sell those off
No,
while
no,
screwing
no.
over
That's
all your
no.
creditors.
That's
That's
not what I'm
not how
saying.
that works. That's
No,
not how
that's
bankruptcy
not.
works.
That's yeah. What I'm saying is the way that the Class A investors or the bondholders or whatever get paid is from the assets, as you just said. The way that the assets produce money is you take the airplane, you sell it to somebody else. The person that buys that airplane, yes, that money does then go to pay off the investors or the bondholders or whatever. But the point is that you're never going to have the reason that they're going bankrupt is because they don't have enough assets to cover all their liabilities. So the people that are getting paid back some of that money some of the bondholders are going to get, maybe they'll get 5 cents on the dollar, maybe they'll get 10 cents on the dollar, but they're going to get screwed. And then the person who purchased the assets is going to have they're going to have all of these assets that they just purchased out of bankruptcy court with a great deal, and they can restart the business. I mean, that's
Yeah, but
how
why
it's
would they
supposed to
restart?
work, not
If you
bailout.
see them,
So you're
but
in
if you
favor of bailouts, huh?
Yeah, of course. Well, in times like these, yeah, of course. If you
Of
have
course.
a company that's going under over and over and over again, why would anybody step in, buy the assets, and then start the company up over again? Like, there's a famous
You can
saying:
run
the
the
easiest way to
company
become a
better.
millionaire is to start with $1 billion and start an airline industry. Like,
No,
these
I
are
get
not
that.
profitable industries. Like, why would you assume? Like, we would just have no airlines. Like, that's it. We would just not fly anymore as Americans. Like, that's preferable to
No, that's
fuck. At
not
that point, I would
no.
take a nationalized airline service than just like having it dry up completely.
That just wouldn't happen. Okay, maybe they need to raise the price of air tickets a little bit so that they don't go bankrupt every time there's a little crisis. That's probably good
This is
business,
not
but
a
that's
little
way better.
crisis.
That's way better than having the taxpayer bail out irresponsible businesses. I can't believe you think it's just so like an easy decision to have taxpayers
It is
bail
an easy
out
decision.
industry.
It's the easiest decision. It's a win-win-win-win.
It's not. We
Everybody
don't have
wins.
any money. The government's
We do
bankrupt.
have money. The government can print as much as it needs. And if we
Yeah, and
need
that
money,
destroys
guess what?
people's.
Not only it doesn't, it hasn't. And every economist knows that it hasn't. It's one of the great mysteries right
So
now
are
of
you
our
an?
time.
So wait. So you're an MMT guy?
I'm not an MMT guy, okay? But
Okay,
right
it
now
sounds
we
like you
don't.
are.
Well, okay, we don't have inflation right now. We haven't, despite historically low interest rates, despite the QE of 2008, we didn't get any of the inflation we thought we would. So clearly, we have a little bit more leniency than we thought. Also, the taxpayer is not quote unquote bailing this out. It's not like the airline shows up at a taxpayer's house and steals money from him. It's not like this comes out of the normal federal the congressional budget. Okay, these would be a specially allocated thing, kind of like TARP, that would go through. They'd be loaned to the people, and it would be paid back. So the airlines win, the companies win, the workers at the airline win, the taxpayer wins because we get money back, and everybody in the United States wins because we still get to fly in airplanes. How could you possibly be opposed to bailouts other than
Okay.
having some strange obsession with like limiting the federal government's activities in any of our economic
Well,
markets?
there's moral hazard with it, but more importantly, the only way you can say that there's no inflation is if you actually just believe just without questioning the government's inflation numbers. The way the where the what people I couldn't believe it when the Federal Reserve Chairman said this, is that we have muted inflation. And I thought that was interesting that he said we have muted inflation, because what that means is, yeah, there is inflation, but we're just not seeing it. The point is, all of the inflation goes to real estate and the stock market, and the real estate values and the stock market were incredibly inflated, way prices going way up. And so the idea that we haven't seen inflation, I just think is wrong. The only way you say that is because you don't count real estate values and stock values in the calculation of inflation, and we have had inflation. And so
Wait, I don't
the
know
other
why
thing
you.
is
I can
doing a
understand real
bailout just
estate. I don't know why
encourage.
you would count. I don't know why you would count stock prices in terms of inflation, because the shares of a company like have some fundamental undervalue that they're representing. Like if a company's making more money and growing, I don't know how you would say that that's inflation. I guess maybe real estate. I haven't heard this idea that real estate is becoming like massively overinflated again, though. I don't think that's something that I've
What?
heard people complain about.
Real estate is outrageously overinflated.
And that's absorbing that the real estate markets themselves are absorbing all of the low interest and extra money that's going through the economy. That's
No, not all of it, but the point is even if you're right that we're not seeing it yet, that doesn't mean that it won't happen. And if you continue this, what happens when you continue just printing money, and printing money is things seem okay until they're not, and then you experience hyperinflation, and you want to kick the can down the road a little bit
we
longer.
we haven't even
It's
gotten
like,
to inflation yet. We can't be scared of hyperinflation if we're not even at inflation. Also, a little bit of inflation is a really good thing. We don't want a deflating currency. That's really bad. So it's a target goal.
We have a little bit of inflation already.
Well, but we're not at our inflation targets, right? That's the whole reason why the Fed has been so generous with their monetary policy over the past several years.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting that we're worried about to bring this all back. I think it's a little bit funny that we're too scared to give a bailout to a company right now because we're worried about what may or may not happen in the future. But being concerned about the amount of personal protective equipment we have right now is not legitimate because we won't need that until a month from now. I think it's interesting to tie those two topics together with those worries, seemingly contradictory at that point.
I just think it's the hospital's job to have enough personal protective equipment, and we're in a crisis right now, and so the governments are doing what they can to help hospitals get the PPE, and if it's the state level, that's great. We have a massively overblown federal government where apparently we all have to look to the federal government to get us our masks, which is just preposterous. Like if you want a situation where we're relying on the federal government to give us medical masks, that's a terrible situation to be in, because the federal government's the last entity you want to be relying on for anything, let alone this. So
the cost of healthcare is already so insanely high in the United States.
Yeah, that's inflation.
The idea that that's not inflation. The idea that we could just also have hospitals hoarding enough equipment to just have that on hand to deal with a pandemic, like we already can barely bear the cost of healthcare in this country. I don't know why we would expect that to be just another thing that we could handle. It's just having pandemic ready equipment like on hand at all times.
Well, first of all, I mean, I do have solutions to our healthcare situation. I don't think anybody could defend our current healthcare situation, and so if I was the one making policy, we would never be in this healthcare situation that we're in. And look, if there's a massive pandemic and the government wants to help out on buying medical masks, I don't have it's not the end of the world to me, but it's not where you want to be relying on, because the federal government has shown time and time again that everything they do, they screw up. And so why would you want to put yourself in reliance upon an entity like the federal government, which screws up nonstop?
Okay. I mean, I'm pretty sure that literally anything the federal government does, you'd be generally opposed to it. It's an ideology thing. I understand. All right. Well, do you have any final words? Anybody? Where can people find you or whatever?
Yeah, everybody. LCTRfan. I go by LCTRfan, and it's spelled LCTRfan. Every single social media, pretty much the same. LCTRfan. So.
Wait, did you really like school? Why lecture fan? What does that mean?
Yeah, I like giving lectures and receiving lectures. So yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for the conversation.
I appreciate it. I had fun.
All right. I'll see you later. Bye.
All right. Bye.